Okay, hi. So we're back reading Black Marxism. We're on part 3, Black Radicalism and Marxist Theory, chapter 9, the Historiography and the Black Radical Tradition, um, Slavery and Democracy. Anyways, before I start, if you finished this book or read Black Marxism, I feel like I've said this before. Robin D.G. Kelly, he wrote the foreword for this book. When I go over the discussions for the book, because we're gonna have discussions, y'all. I'm gonna reread the foreword because it's literally so good. I read it at the beginning of my videos. If you go all the way down to this playlist, you'll see it. But I really love the foreword, and he wrote this book. Ate it up, no crumbs. Licked the plate clean, mind you. Like, I really like this part, it's like the end of the foreword. The promise of liberation captures the essence of Black revolt and introduces a completely different temporality. Blues times. Blues time eschews any reassurance that the path to liberation is preordained. Blues times is flexible and improvisatory. It is simultaneously in the moment, the past, the future, and the timeless space of the imagination. As the geographer Clyde Woods taught us, the blues is not a lament, but a clear-eyed way of knowing and revealing the world that recognizes the tragedy and humor in everyday life, as well as the capacity of people to survive, think, and resist in the face of adversity. And I was reading this part over here about the blues, and I want to, Blues times resembles the anarchist theorist Yuri Gordon calls a generative temporality. A generative temporality treats the future itself as as indeterminate and full of contingencies. By thinking of the Black radical tradition as generative rather than prefigurative, not only is the future uncertain, but the road is constantly changing along with new social relations, requiring new visions and exposing new contradictions and challenges. Okay, and then when you get into this book, it talks about like the people that within the Black radical tradition. It's so good. But let me get to this. This one's on surrealism, like keeping it surreal, dreams of the marvelous. And it talks about blues. Wait a second. Where's the one that I like? Well, all these pages are literally so good. Wait a second. Here lies the revolutionary nature of the blues. Through its fidelity to fantasy and desire, the blues generates an irreducible and, so to speak, habit-forming demand for freedom and what Rimbaud, that's a name, Rimbaud, called true life. Desire and sexuality and their relationship to revolt have always been central themes in music, but were often avoided by well-meaning defenders of the race concerned about reinforcing stereotypes of Black promiscuity. Surrealists, on the other hand, have a long-standing interest in sexual liberty and the power of the erotic. Wait. Where did I read that? Wait, where did I read that? Which must have been. What? Wait. I think it's in Black Feminist Thought. Was it this one? I'm looking for Audre Lorde's. Okay, here. Wait. No, this is not the one. Wait, I think it might. Wait a second. Dang. Oh, here it is. There are many kinds of powers, used and unused, acknowledged or otherwise. The erotic is a resource within each of us that lies in a deeply female and spiritual plane. firmly rooted in the power of our unexpressed or unrecognized feeling. In order to perpetuate itself, every oppression must corrupt or distort those various sources of power within the culture of the oppressed that can provide energy for change. For women, this has meant a suppression of the erotic as a considered source of power and information for our lives. For Lord Audre Lorde, sexuality is a component of the larger construct of the erotic as a source of power in women. Lorde's notion is one of power as energy, as something people possess, which must be annexed in order for larger systems of oppression to function. Sexuality becomes a domain of restriction and repression. Think of purity culture, abstinence, and how that's tied to white supremacy and patriarchy. Girl, all of it, it's so interesting. Oppression with this energy is tied to a larger system of race, class, and gender oppression. But Lorde's words also signal the potential for Black women's empowerment by showing sexuality and the erotic to be a domain of exploration, pleasure, and human agency. From a Black feminist standpoint, sexuality encompasses the both and nature of human existence, the potentiality for a sexuality that simultaneously oppresses and empowers. Damn! Read the book. Yes. It's actually so good and really easy to read. I love it. And then I have another book that kind of relates to this and sexuality. If you want that book recommendation, girl, I got a book for almost every topic. Almost. We're making a library up in here. Okay. Anyways, slavery and democracy. Thank you for listening to that very long intro and morning tangent. Yes, I just took my ADHD medicine. I have some juice here, but I can't drink my juice because you're not supposed to mix ADHD medicine and citrus. So I'm waiting to drink it, but I do have my coffee. Anyways, delish. I love coffee. Slavery and democracy. We have already noted how the idea of slavery to Du Bois's mind was opposed to the ideals of democracy. The ideology necessary to rationalize slavery disallowed the further development of liberal democracy except as a myth. But Du Bois understood that the relationship between slavery and democracy was not a question of the clash of ideas. His approach to history was similar in the respect to that which Marx and Engels had presented in the German ideology. And this is like a little quote. Next. This conception of history comes to the conclusion that all forms and products of consciousness cannot be dissolved by mental criticism, by resolution into self-consciousness or transformation into apparitions. Girl, what the fuck? Did I say that right? Apparitions? I don't know what that word means though. Let's look it up. APPAR. Apparitions?
Apparition.
Oh, apparition. A ghost or ghost-like image of a person. A ghost. What's the next word?
Spectre.
Specters. A ghost, also meaning ghost. Fancies, etc., but only by the practical overthrow of the actual social relations which gave rise to the idealistic humbug. For Du Bois, the creation of those political institutions and structures identified with American democracy involved congruence with the country's economic character, that is, with the slave system and capitalism. Okay, so the political institutions and structures are aligned with slavery and capital. Okay, sorry. I had to think about what that sentence said for a sec. I was like, what? And so, though the American Constitution reflected the power of the plantocracy only in its devices for electoral representation, that had been sufficient. Oh, I did read that correctly. I'm sorry. Let me start that over. For Du Bois, the creation of those political institutions and structures identified with the American democracy involved congruence with the country's economic character, that is, with the slave system and capitalism. And so, though the American Constitution reflected the power of the plantocracy only in its devices for electoral representation, that had been sufficient advantage for the domination of the federal government by that class during the Republic's first several decades. This had meant a domination by a class that consisted of 7% of the South's population. My papa's calling me. Sorry about that. My grandfather called me because he wants me to take him to the bank. Currently, I'm unemployed, so I just help out with my grandparents and I help out around the house and I work on my Black Studies project or just like other things. And I mean, I did have a job. I had this research analysis job for an author because I really want to like become a writer. That's what I wanted to do since I was a kid. My nana, she taught me how to write in cursive. She taught me how to type. My mom, she always bought me like my composition book so I can like make little storyboards and all that stuff. Like both like, you know what I mean? Like that's what I did as a kid, and that's kind of what I want to do in the future. So yeah. Oh yeah, so you called me, but yeah. Anyways, so I helped them out, and so I'm gonna probably take him to the bank tomorrow. Anyways, sorry, let's keep reading. This meant that the domination by a class that consisted of 7% of the South's population. The next quote, it had in American history chose 11 out of 16 presidents, 17 out of 28 judges of the Supreme Court, 14 out of 19 attorney generals, 21 out of 33 speakers of the House, 80 out of 134 foreign ministers. Page 47 from Black Reconstruction. Consequently, oh my God, and I put in here Cop City. I'm gonna see, what does this mean? Why did I write that? Let's read. Okay. Consequently, I love the color purple, and also this is how I highlight my books. To me, everything's important. Okay. Consequently, to this power, the plantocracy had established a legal structure that effectively eliminated the civil rights of the 9 million Black and poor white workers to be found in the South in the mid-19th century. This perversion of the apparatus of representative democracy had survived the Civil War and Reconstruction and had persisted into the next century, despite the challenges of populism, organized labor, political radicalism, the Depression, the mass Black movement of the UNIA. I think that's the one that's Garvey. Where he at? Here's Black nationalism. ABB. Where's the UNIA? Oh, UNIA. The Garvey movement. Here it is. Where'd it go? I'm so confused. United Negro. United Negro what? Huh? United Negro Improvement Association. Big purr. Okay. Of UNIA. Federalism had evolved into states' rights. The ideological dressing for first slavery and then Black codes, Jim Crow, and even more contemporary forms of repression. Oh, and I just made this video on TikTok about fascism, and it compared the like racism, like the Black codes, Jim Crow, whatever, to a fascist regime. And then right now, okay, sorry for the tangents, but it's really interesting to me. Like after integration, blah 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 blah, but it like after integration it was like less overt racism compared to like the implicit or implied racism, where it's like more hidden. Like you can see it in like housing, segregate, like, you know what I mean, like redlining, thank you. Like, and with redlining and stuff like that, it's really interesting. There's someone that had a very articulated way of saying it, but anyways, sorry. Federalism had evolved into states' rights, the ideological dressing for first slavery and then black codes, Jim Crow, and more contemporary forms of repression. Each shift of the apparatus of repression had been associated with the changing forms of exploitations as blacks moved from being slaves to being sharecroppers and peons, and finally to being proletariats or labor reserve. Oh, now I know why I said this. Okay, so you know how the cops started off as slave catchers, like protecting property, blah 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 blah. So the creation of like cop cities, it highlights the ever-growing community. And you could wait, there was this like article that I'm trying to remember that was talking about this, like when the police become hyper militarized is because the community and community as survival. Oh, it's in Pan-Africanism in the African Diaspora by Ronald Walters. It talks about the policing systems, and how if you look, you have to look at the policing systems as international, because the same repressive things are happening in Britain. And then they also said, I think, South Africa. It's really interesting. But when we get to that book, we'll get to that book. But anyways, in the North, the dictatorship of property had been manifest in capital and investment. Not as rich or as powerful as the plantocrats in the beginning, the northern merchants, manufacturers, and industrialists had developed on the backs of southern agriculture and European labor. The North exploited its labor more efficiently, not having to absorb the costs of developing it during the non-productive years. Those costs were incurred by the socioeconomic sector of Ireland, Germany, Italy, and England. The North supplied the middlemen between the South and its European and domestic markets. It supplied the shipping and transportation for South's produce. It was also in the process of developing a national economy of total integration before the Civil War, while the South was becoming increasingly dependent. In the world market, the merchants, the manufacturers had all the advantages of unity, knowledge, and purpose, and could hammer down the price of raw material. The slaveholder, therefore, saw northern merchants and manufacturers enrich themselves from the results of southern agriculture. Oh, okay, this is like, okay, sorry. His capitalistic rivals of the North were hardworking, simple living zealots, devoting their whole energy and intelligence to building up an industrial system. They quickly monopolized transport and mines and factories, and they were, oh, that one's page 41, the first part, and then his capitalistic is the next quote. They quickly monopolized, oh, the result, dang. They quickly monopolized transport and mines and factories, and they were more than willing to include the big plantations. The result was that Northern and European industry set prices for Southern cotton, tobacco, and sugar, which left a narrow margin of profit for the planter. And that's page 37 from Black Reconstruction. And it's interesting when that, like, when you think about the economy in terms of like, oh, the Civil War was fought over the economy. Yes. And then Black people made the Civil War about themselves, because they looked around, they saw what was happening. It was like, oh, they fighting? It is time for freedom. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Down. Okay, sorry. Capital, both industrial and financial, continued to grow until the northern industrialists could challenge the political power of the plantocrats. And while it grew, it too undermined the structures of democracy. The North had yielded to democracy, but only because democracy was curbed by the dictatorship of property and investment, which left in the hands of the leaders of the industry such economic power as ensured their mastery and their profits. Less than this, they knew perfectly well they could not yield, and more than this, they would not. Page 46 from Black Reconstruction. Once the industrial class emerged as dominant in the nation, it possessed not only its own basis of power and the social relations historically related to that power, but it also had available to it the instruments of repression created by the now subordinate Southern ruling class. In its struggle with labor, it could activate racism to divide the labor movements into antagonistic forces. And think about that currently, and why racism has not been desocialized from this population. Moreover, the permutations of the instrument appeared endless: black against white, Anglo-Saxon against Southern, and Eastern European, domestic against immigrant, proletariat against sharecropper, white American against Asian, black, Latin American, and so on. Per. Now it is Reconstruction in the Black Elite. This one's also like one page. Okay. Reconstruction in the Black Elite. One of the most revealing aspects of Black Reconstruction was Du Bois's assessment of the Black petite bourgeoisie, the element of Black society that with which he had been most closely associated for most of his then 67 years. For the first time in his public pronouncements, he was resolved to expose the extent to which his beloved elite, through the logic of its own development, had moved apart from the Black masses. As he reckoned it, the process of bourgeoisification and alienation that had begun during slavery had not revealed its contradiction until Reconstruction. Suddenly, the petite bourgeoisie were confronted with the political expression of Black labor. The difference that now came was that an infidelity large. What did I say? Infidelity? Indefinitely? Don't make fun of me. That was funny. I was like, wait a second. The difference that now came was that an indefinitely larger number of Negroes than ever before was enfranchised subtly, and 99% of them belonged to the laboring class. Whereas the Negroes who voted in the early history of the country were, for the most part, property holders and prospective, if not actual constituents of a petty bourgeoisie. Page 350 of Black Reconstruction. Still, during these first heady days following the emancipation of the ending of the Civil War, the Black petite bourgeoisie had presumed to lead. Quite soon, however, its ideological and political vacuity had begun to be apparent. Its leadership nominal and at its best mere mediation between the demands of the Black masses and the power of the ruling classes. And then the next quote. When freedom came, this mass of Negro labor was not without intelligent leadership, and a leadership which became a former race prejudice and a leadership which, because of former race prejudice and the present color line, could not be divorced from the laboring mass, as had been the case with the poor whites. Free Negroes from the North, most of whom had been born in the South and knew they knew something, because sometimes came back in considerable numbers during Reconstruction and took their place as leaders. The result was that the Negroes were not, as they are sometimes painted, simply a mass of densely ignorant toilers. It was, however, a leadership which was not all clear in its economic thought. On the whole, it believed in the accumulation of wealth and the exploitation of labor as the normal method of economic development, but it also believed in the right to vote as the basis and defense of economic life. And think about that right now with like how the Black middle class or Black elite class, they're more likely to be capitalists, like Black capitalists. It's interesting to see how this history is still present. You know what I mean? Sorry. A little bit of a nerd, especially history nerd. Yeah. But it also believed in the right to vote as the basis and defense of economic life, and gradually but surely it was forced by the demand of the mass of Negro laborers to face the problem of land. Thus, the Negro leaders gradually but certainly turned towards emphasis on economic emancipation. Pages 350 to 351 of Black Reconstruction. Inevitably, however, even these tenuous links between the elite strata and the Black labor had disintegrated. Du Bois now believed he understood the forces that made a mockery of the racial solidarity that had been the elite evangelism. evangelism. I don't know why I don't know why it's hard for me to say things sometimes. Evangelism. First, there was the ambivalence of the black petite bourgeoisie. The Negro's own black leadership was naturally of many sorts. Some, like the whites, were petty bourgeois seeking to climb to wealth. Others were educated men helping to develop a new nation without regard to mere race lines, while a third group were the idealists, trying to uplift the Negro race and put them on a par with the whites. In the minds of very few of them was there any clear and distinct plan for the development of a laboring class into a position of power and mastery over the modern industrial state. Page 612 from Black Reconstruction. They were to pay, sometimes with their lives, when the changing order of privilege concomitant in the continuing development of northern industrial wealth left them vulnerable. The bargain of 1876 left capital, as represented by the old planter class, the new northern capitalists, and the capitalists that began to rise out of the poor whites, with the control of labor greater than any modern industrial state in civilized hands. Page 630. A lawlessness which in 1865 through 1868 was still spasmodic and episodic, now became organized, and its real underlying industrial causes obscured by political excuses and race hatred, like the KKK. This is educational, TikTok. Please do not take this down. I don't know, TikTok, YouTube, sorry. Dude, in a lot of my TikTok videos, sometimes not a lot, whenever I talk about sometimes when I talk about things, I'm like, I have to say it's educational or something because they will take it down. They'll be like, this is harmful. And I'll be like, and I'll send my appeal and I'll be like, this is racist. Fix it. And what? But anyways, I don't know what I'm allowed to say or not on YouTube though. Using a technique of mass and midnight murder, the South began widely organized aggressions upon the Negroes. Armed guerrilla warfare killed thousands of Negroes. Political riots were staged. Their causes or occasions were always obscure. Their results always certain. 10 to 100 times as many Negroes were killed as whites. Page 674. The violence and terror that descended upon blacks during the 50 years that followed Reconstruction left the black elite shaken and pared down to its opportunities. Negroes did not surrender the ballot easily or immediately, but it was a losing battle with public opinion, industry, wealth, and religion against them. Their own leaders decried politics and preached submission. All their efforts towards manly self-assertion were distracted by defeatism and counsels of despair, backed by the powerful propaganda of a religion that taught meeklessness, sacrifice, and humility. Pages 692 through 93. I am so excited when I do a video on Black religion. I just have to get my papers somewhere. Girl, I'm disorganized right now, but I've been organizing myself. That's what I need to get. First, organize myself, because anyways, this brings us to the situation when Booker T. Washington became the leader of the Negro race and advised them to depend upon industrial education and work rather than politics. The better class of Southern Negroes stopped voting for a generation. Page 694. Through its wealth and educational institutions, the black elite survived, growing more remote from the masses of blacks as its ability to reproduce itself developed. They avoided the mistake of trying to meet force by force. They bent to the storm of beating, lynching, and murder. They kept their souls in spite of public and private insults of every description. They built an inner culture which the world recognizes in spite of the fact that it is still half strangled and inarticulate. Page 667 from Black Reconstruction. In this relative social isolation, its culture continued to adopt forms from the class peers from which it was estranged by race. Think about the black middle class are typically going to be more... Okay, actually I have a good example. I had a friend. She is not my friend anymore. When she said this, I was like, oh, we're not friends. So one time she asked me, she was like, oh, I don't know. No, she didn't ask me this question. She said, I don't understand why people at Howard University hate kids from Jack and Jill. And I told her, I was like, I don't really think it's hatred. but it's elitism. I realized she wasn't asking me a question, but then she will also a couple days later, we were talking about something, and then she was like, oh yeah, it's Black people's fault for the conditions that they're in. That statement is not only classist, but it's racist. But she could not recognize that it was racist. But she comes from a Jack and Jill background, a background of money. You know what I mean? Like, because typically it's kids that in Jack or Jill, typically kids that are in Jack and Jill. This is generally speaking. I'm not saying all kids of Jack and Jill think this way. No, no. I know that for, oh wait, my grandfather's calling me. Sorry, my grandfather called me. But what I was saying is that because of her background, like I personally don't, I told her it was wrong what she said. I was like, that's racist and classist. But she is a product of her environment, like all of us are. And because she grew up in an environment that sometimes when you have like when you like go up in financial status, or if you are born into a higher financial status, it can remove you. Not all the time. I'm not saying, you know what I mean? So yeah, but and it's highlighting the like one time, like she would talk about like history. She'd be like, oh, like I'm not a part. She would complain about not knowing or being a part of like Black history or understanding it. And I told her, I was like, girl, you literally go to church. What do you mean you're not a part of like the Black culture, whatever, whatever, whatever? Like, you know what I mean? So it's just like that disconnect that comes with financial status, especially in America. Well, in other places too. But anyways, hey, and I'm not gonna sit here and act like I come from a privileged background, like because of the work that my grandparents did and my mom, like my mom's a single parent, a doctor to triplets, you know what I mean? Like you know what I mean? Like, but because of the work that they did, like my grandparents started off as a sharecropper and a domestic worker. And so it's like, but for me, I never had to struggle. I never had to worry about a next meal. And so that's why it's important for me to be aware of that privilege, one, and understand class consciousness and have a comprehension of and being able to understand, like in my own language and understanding of things, like how privilege can interact with my perspective, right? It's the same way for like, you know how like light skinned people, this is my least favorite of light skins. The ones that are like, oh, I'm only pretty because I'm light skinned. But with that perspective, there's an understanding that because of the preferences and privileges or the socialization within a white supremacist society, people can internalize that. It's the same way with class. It's the same way with sex and gender. You know what I mean? So it's just important to understand that. But anyways, let me finish this last section and then we'll be done with the video. Thank you for bearing with me with all my tangents. I don't know if you guys appreciate my tangents or not, because like sometimes I'm like, Alana, you talk too much, but I love to talk. And also just like for me, it helps to understand what a book is saying or what someone is saying through like examples or like being able to like, what is that? What are they saying? You know, like a big sentence. I'm like, what? And then I'm like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? But anyways, okay. In this relative social isolation, its culture continued to adopt forms from the class peers from which it was estranged by race. But by the constant terror, the entire Black community had been turned in on itself, and by the persistence of poverty, its social stratifications had been stabilized. However, the resources of the Black community were too few to support a mobility of more than an incremental significance. With the Black migration to the North and West, which occurred at the turn of the century, this situation would change, but only slightly. Meanwhile, though Du Bois still could not admit it, the idealism of the Black petite bourgeoisie had been transformed into an ideology that served to hold the Black community as a semi-preserve, thank you. I was like, see, what's going on with my mind? Anyway, for the more effective exploitation by its elite. As he had made clear in the Rosenwald Conference, racial solidarity still overrode a radical critique of his class. We must rid ourselves of the persistent idea that the advance of mankind consists of the scaling off of layers who become incorporated with the world's upper and ruling classes, leaving always dead and inert below the ignorant and unenlightened mass of men. Our professional classes are not aristocrats and our masters. They are and must be the most efficient of our servants and thinkers whose legitimate reward is the advancement of the great mass of American Negroes and with them the uplift of all men. Period. Uh, Next section is Du Bois, Marx, and Marxism. Wait, how long is that? Oh, it's only one page. Do we continue or should we just pause and well no, we'll pause because it then leads into Bolshevism and American communism. So we'll pause. Anyways, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it and I hope you have a wonderful day.